Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our April 1st session of this course. If we are disconnected for more than 10 minutes and we can't get back with each other, check on your Canvas site a little bit later today for information we would have covered during this particular session. So by my clock, it is almost 1:15. Now it is 1:15. Let's go ahead and officially get started then. Okay, at this time, let's do our attendance check-in. At this time, please type present for your attendance in chat. If you did not sign in with your full name, be sure to include it in the message. Okay, so let's get started. So last session, let's review what we talked about. Last session, we began our conversation on motivation. Today, we'll finish up the ideas of motivation during this review and then get into emotion. So motivation is that thing that energizes and directs our behavior toward a specific goal. And we know that people have different and various levels of motivation. We had several perspectives of motivation that we examined last class. We looked at instinct, the old way to look at it, but we now have sort of like an evolutionary view, looking at natural selection, how motives that enhance our survival are passed along to our offspring. So we see these types of things move on from generation to generation. We also talked about drive reduction, where we have a physical need like thirst or food. And this drive that it creates in us is uncomfortable, and we want to reduce this as best we can. And so we are motivated to participate in drive reducing behaviors. So if you have a need for hunger, you have hunger, it causes this drive in you, and then you'll go get something to eat. That's the drive reducing behaviors. We're motivated to go get something to eat. We also talked about optimal arousal. An optimal arousal level is basically looking at the comfortable level of arousal that individuals have. Some people have to have a lot of stuff around them to keep them going, keep them energized, so to speak, to motivate them. Some not so much. For example, I described to you, for example, an individual who may want to have a motorcycle as their primary vehicle because that excites them, that gets them motivated to do the chore of driving, for example. We also talked about Yerkes-Dodson law. This is where they looked at arousal in performance. And the idea for arousal in performance is this. If you have too little arousal or too little stress, then your performance is not going to be so good. If you have a great deal of stress, then your performance is not going to be so good there either. So if it's too little stress, you're almost too calm and too sleepy to do anything. If you have too much stress, you're so chaotic that you can't even focus on the task at hand. That is why the middle ground or moderate level of stress seems to be where our performance tends to be the best. Then we discussed hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where the lower level needs must be met before higher order needs can be addressed. And we've talked about this on several occasions already. Then we looked specifically at one particular type of motivation, and that is hunger. And we saw all the things involved in our hunger, having this motivation for hunger. The brain, like the hypothalamus, hormones, the digestive system, as well as even social factors can impact how it is that we eat. And eating is something that we must do in order to survive. And unfortunately for that, we have people who have weight control problems. And the weight control problems have some major issues to try to prevent you from changing your weight. We talked about the set point. And this is where the body sort of establishes your weight and says, this is where you should be. Okay, so it does it on its own. And then what it will do, it will control your amount of hunger, raising it or lowering it, and your rate of metabolism, how quickly you get rid of stuff that's just sitting around in your body, how quickly you get rid of that donut or not. So by doing this, it makes it very difficult for you to change the set point and ergo change your weight. Despite your wishes, your body will fight you. And we mentioned also the issues of dealing with obesity, as well as the idea that there are several genetic factors that seem to be at play. And the last thing that we covered are the other needs, the need to belong, such as need to affiliate with other people, the need to achieve, the need to be able to be seen as doing well, to be able to have accomplishment. And then finally, the need to power, the need to control others. Now, think about what this means by way of motivation. if you have a need for power, that sort of dictates that you would tend to try for jobs or positions like supervisors, managers, or directors, because that's something that fulfills a certain need in you and therefore motivates your behavior. So that's what we talked about last class and our last session together, motivation. All right, so today we're going to wrap up chapter 10 by looking at the second part of this chapter, emotion. So we've looked at motivation. Now we're going to look at emotion. We start off by examining the theories of emotion. Well, first, we need to understand physiological arousal. That's one of the key things. One of the key things they always sort of debate about emotion theories or theories of emotion is what happens first, the physiological changes or the emotional changes. So with physiological arousal, it comes before, the physiology comes before emotion, or does it come with the emotion? Or is there some other factors involved, like Schachter and Singer's two-factor theory? What happens with the brain when we're going through emotions? What about the autonomic nervous system, which we talked about before when we go through emotions? All of these are going to be some of the topics that we'll be discussing as we go through this conversation about emotion. All right, first, emotion, arousal, behavior, cognition. Okay, someone cuts you off on the road. You may feel the emotion of anger. Emotions are a mix of expressive behavior, yelling and accelerating, a bodily arousal, sweat, pounding heart, and conscious experience, thoughts, especially the labeling of the emotion. What a bad driver. I'm angry, even scared. Better calm down. So all these things can go when someone just cuts you off on the road. You have your expressive behavior, you have your bodily arousal, and you have the conscious experience itself. So how do these components of emotion interact and relate to each other? Do our thoughts trigger our emotions, or are they a product of our emotions? How are the bodily signs triggered? How do we decide which emotion we're feeling? An emotion is a full body, mind, behavior response to a situation. Okay, I want to make a clarification here between emotion and some things that you may have heard of before called a mood. All right, so emotion is different than a mood, which is not a response to a situation. Mood is not a response to a situation. When someone says he's in a bad mood, that's not the same as saying he's in a bad emotion. That really doesn't make any sense. So emotion from mood is different. All right, so a mood is not based on a situation, and an attitude which is predisposed toward act. So it's not an attitude. All right, it's basically the following: when you have a longer term malaise or sort of a depression, or not officially termed depression, but you feel bad about something, you just everything just seems gray to you a particular day. On other days it doesn't seem that way, but today you have this longer lasting sort of this emotional connotated type of behavior going on. That is what we call a mood. It's much longer lasting and it's not tied to a specific type of emotion. An emotion, a really bad one, may have started you off and triggered sort of like this bad mood that you're experiencing, but mood has longevity to it, to a sense. Emotion is based on a particular response to a situation. So when someone's in a bad mood and you don't want to talk with them, that just basically means that whatever you talk with them about, it may just come out to cause an issue, and they may even get emotional about it based on that situation of you going to talk with them about something. So mood, much longer lasting, okay, emotion based on a situation. I just want to make sure that we understood the difference between those two ideas. Now, the theories of emotion, we have the arousal and cognition, also sort of like the chicken and the egg debates. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Or did they evolve together? Which happens first, the body changes that go with an emotion, or the thoughts, your conscious awareness and labeling of that emotion, or did they happen together? So these first few theories that we look at regarding emotion, they're having basically what amounts to a chicken and egg debate, which comes first. James Lange theory, the James Lange theory, says that we have the bodily changes before we have thoughts about any emotion. So the body changes first before emotional thoughts. Cannon-Bard theory says the body happens with the body changes happens with the thought. So they're happening simultaneously. So at James Lange, the physiological changes, the body changes happen first, then we have emotion. With Cannon-Bard, the physiological changes and the emotions happen at the same time. And then we have Schachter-Singer, who basically says we have the following. We have the physiological changes, and then we must have the thought / label. We must label it something. So for Schachter and Singer and Schachter, it's all about how we label what we're feeling. That determines the emotion. And then we have Zayonks, Ledoux, and Lazarus, which we're looking at a variety of other factors. And we'll talk a little bit more about those when we get to them. Okay. So we start off first with one of the earliest theories of emotion that was sort of co-founded in a way by William James and Carl Lange. They did it independently, so it's not one individual named James Lange. No, it's two individuals. One is William James and one is Carl Lange. And so that's why they sort of did these things around the same time, and they both were given credit. William James would say something like this: we feel afraid because we tremble. We feel sorry because we cry. So what he's putting in the forefront here is the physiological aspects, the behavior, the body changes that are going on. So if you're trembling, you may be afraid. So trembling, afraid. And then you're crying, so you must be sorry. So that is how he sees it, that the body before the thoughts, the physiological changes before the emotions that we experience. So James Lange theory states that emotion is our conscious awareness of our physiological responses to stimuli. Our conscious awareness of physiological responses to stimuli. So as we respond to stimuli in our environment, we are aware of it. And that's where we become aware of what the emotions we are experiencing. So our body arousal happens first, and then the cognitive awareness and label for the feeling I am angry happens. And the same thing goes this way. According to this theory, if someone makes you smile, we may then feel happy. So it's not saying that you are happy and therefore you smile. No, they're saying someone makes you smile and then you feel happy. So the behavior, the body changes are key here, and they go first. I'm going to pause there real quickly to see if there are any questions or comments so far. Okay, no questions or comments for the first one. All right, so that's the James Lange theory. The other one that we want to cover is going to be the Cannon-Bard theory, simultaneous body response in cognitive experience. The Cannon-Bard theory asserts that we have a conscious cognitive experience of an emotion at the same time as our body is responding, not afterwards. So it must happen simultaneously, according to Cannon-Bard theory. So the human body responses run parallel to the cognitive responses rather than causing them. So one is not causing the other. Now, in James Lange, the tendency there is to say that the physiological changes cause the emotion. Here, the physiological changes and the cognitive responses to whatever that stimuli is in the environment are happening at the same time. So they're not causing each other. They're just running in parallel with each other. So looking at sort of the adjusting of the Cannon-Barr theory, we got to follow the logic here. Emotions are not just a separate mental experience. When our body responses are blocked, emotions do not feel as intense. Let me explain what this is saying. What if you put somebody in an emotional event that caused emotion on a level of 10 from their perspective, and then you put another group in an emotional event, but you slipped them some sort of drug and some sort of experiment, or gave them some sort of procedure which dampened, okay, our body's responses, meaning that we were not able to feel the full force of it. So when our body responses are blocked in some way, the emotions do not feel as intense. So the body plays a significant role in it, and this idea of what emotions we are experiencing. And if there is a way for us to dampen the body's responses or block them, then the person does not feel that those emotions are as intense. For example, I gave you the first example, emotion at a level of 10. Maybe now it's maybe an emotion at a level of 7. Okay, so we do see there is some sort of connection there, some sort of interplay between the body and your reaction to some sort of emotional stimuli and how you gauge that emotion. So our cognitions influence our emotions in many ways, including our interpretations of stimuli. Oftentimes, how we interpret something is going to determine how we're going to feel about it. So if we interpret something that is that a threat, then I'm afraid. If it's not a threat, then I'm happy. I'm having a great fun time. This is really scary. Okay, but scary with a good thing, a good quote here. So the idea here is that your interpretations as something being a threat is something that also plays a role in it too, and the cognitive experience of this. So that takes us to one other idea before we go to the last group of theories here. We talk about Schachter and Singer. I love saying Schachter and Singer two-factor theory. Very social psychology type of thing here. Emotion, your experience of emotion is your body, your physiological body changes plus a label. All right. So the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory suggests that emotions do not exist until we add a label to whatever body sensations we are feeling. So you have this body sensation, and all it is at that point is simply a body sensation. There is no emotional connotation to it at all yet until you label it somehow. So I face a stranger and my heart is pounding. That is the physiological response there. But then you have so many choices here. Your heart is pounding. Is it fear, excitement, anger, lust, or did I have too much caffeine? What they are suggesting here, and it makes some sense, the label completes the emotion. And also note here that a pounding heart, a physiological response to a stimuli in your environment, can be many, many things. A pounding heart can be related to fear. It can be related to excitement. It can be related to anger. It can be related to lust. And it definitely can be related to too much caffeine. So the pounding heart needs a label before we know what the emotion is that we are experiencing. Now let's see how they conducted an experiment to test this. In a study by Stanley Schachter and Jerome Singer in 1962, subjects experienced a spillover effect. A spillover effect when arousal was caused by injections of what turned out to be adrenaline. The subjects interpreted their agitation due to the adrenaline to whatever emotion the others in the room appeared to be feeling. The emotional label spilled over from others. So let me explain to this very carefully. What this means is this. These participants in this study, they were slipped a drug. Okay, so they weren't told this drug was going to make you agitated or anything like that. They were given some cover story, most likely. So they didn't know all of a sudden when they started to feel a little bit agitated, there was a logical reason behind it. So the drug was slipped to them. They feel agitated. And at that time, they were put into another room with other people there, and they would be filling out a form about how they're feeling now. And if people in the room were feeling happy, for example, the participant filling out that form who got that injection that's causing this agitation, this physiological arousal, would rate themselves as being more happy. If the people in the room were sad, the participant would say more sad. So you get the point. So whatever emotionality was being displayed in that room with the other people who worked with the experimenter, then the true subject felt the spillover. Whatever the emotional label was being spilled over from the other people in the room who were working with the experimenter, they felt that themselves. That's how they labeled emotion. So what they were able to do and demonstrate in this experiment is that we can make you feel a certain emotion by just giving you agitation, okay, for some unknown cause, and then giving you some reason to say it's this emotion or that emotion. So, for example, if you're at a party and everyone is feeling really, really great about the party, and you feel some agitation or physiological arousal, you're going to be much, much more likely to associate that with you having a good time as well. All right, any questions on that? I know that was a little bit more of a complicated explanation. All right, someone please give me a chat that you got it or you understood it. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love when people are kind to their instructors. Okay, now let's get to the following group here. This is Zayance, Ledoux, and Lazarus. So they did some research and looked at emotions without awareness or cognition, okay? So, theory. Some emotional reactions, especially fears, likes, and dislikes, develop in what they refer to as the low road. Remember, we discussed the low road previously. I believe it was first introduced in chapter 3, consciousness in the two-track mind. We talked about the low road, where we are not consciously aware of stuff, and the high road, where we are, okay? So the low road here is basically saying certain types of reactions, fears, likes, and dislikes, develop in the low road through the brain, skipping conscious thought, all right? So that suggests that there are some that go through the high road where your cerebral cortex is at play and you will have conscious awareness of it. So in one study, people showed an amygdala response to certain images above left. So these are like mysterious looking eyes, like the eyes of a predator animal that we'd see at night, our ancestors would see at night. So they were showed an amygdala response to certain images without being aware of the image or their reaction. So they were shown this so quickly that they had no conscious awareness of it, yet their amygdala did. Their amygdala responded with a fear burst where they saw these things. Now, when I say saw, they saw them, but they're not consciously aware that they saw them. So if we look at the first image of the female here, the speedy low road, we have the fear stimulus going through the eyes. It then goes to the thalamus and straight to the amygdala where we have our fear response. What it did not do, it did not go to the cortex. Now, if you recall, the cerebral cortex, that's us. That's where we have our conscious awareness of stuff. Anything that happens beneath that is happening in the low road people. And so the idea is we don't know about it. All right. So in this instance, we can have a threat appraisal without awareness. We can see something that makes us afraid and scares us without being aware that it just happened. So it's almost as if sometimes people say something like this: all of a sudden my lizard brain kicked in and I just feel afraid for some reason, okay? And the idea is that that could happen. You could have this fear response and not have a clue as to why you're having this fear response. It could simply be that your eyes fell on something that triggered the thalamus, that triggered the amygdala, and a fear response was initiated, okay? But you don't know why. So this is what we're seeing here, is that Zanyant and Ledoux were basically saying that you can have these emotional responses occur instantly, and there's no appraisal involved. That's the key thing. There's no appraisal because there's no awareness. All right. Now let's look at B for the female here. We have the fear stimulus that goes to the thalamus, which goes to the cerebral cortex, which then goes to the amygdala. That's the high road. And so you're fully aware of what you saw that's causing the fear response. But also note this. It's much speedy on the low road. I mean, we're talking about seconds. And when something is potentially dangerous, seconds matter. So if it's something really dangerous, it could be something simple as this. You're walking on the path in the woods, and all of a sudden you jump off the path, like the safety, and you don't know why you did it. But then all of a sudden your brain gets the after action report. You almost step on a snake, a venomous snake, for example. All right, so that speedy reaction may be very good towards someone's survival. All right, so let's see how all these things really compare. So let's look at it from the perspective of appraisal. Okay, appraisal. So with Schachter and Singer, they highlighted the role of appraisal in labeling emotions. This agitation is fear. So you had to label it before you had some sort of emotion. You had to appraise it. Okay, I'm feeling this way. Why am I feeling this way? Bam, that's the emotion. All right. Richard Lazarus noted a top-down cognitive appraisal of stimuli. Is this a threat, or is this something that I would enjoy? This influences your emotion too. So you have to appraise it as being threat or not threat. So if you are told that you're going to be jumping off a cliff, okay, do you see that as a particular threat to you or something that you might enjoy? If it's not a threat, something that you might enjoy, you're going to get really jazzed about it, very excited about it. Some fear, because that's going to be natural, but not terrified fear that's going to say, I'm not going to do it. I'm too afraid. Okay, so the idea here is that we need to have that appraisal of it being a threat or not. For example, let's say you're babysitting somebody's house or house sitting, and they're off in the woods somewhere. It's a very isolated place. And all of a sudden you hear it's about ready to storm and wind. And then middle of the night, you hear something scratching on the window, and you're by yourself in this big house, scratching on the window. You have to make a threat assessment. Is that just a limb brushing against the downstairs window, or somebody trying to break in? If it's a threat, you'll get the emotion of fear. If it's not a threat, you'll roll over and go back to sleep. All right? And then we look at the following here, Zanyant and Ledoux. Okay, Zanyant and Ledoux. Some emotional response occur instantly, and we feel before we think about it, before we appraise. So the idea here is that with each one of these, we can see how appraisal plays into it. Very much with Schachter and Singer, and we have to have some appraisal as a threat or not threat, according to Richard Lazarus. Or for Zanyant and Ledoux, stuff goes on before the appraisal, so appraisal really isn't an important thing in that regard. So they don't have to appraise it. This is stuff that happens more so on the low road. So looking at this by way of an example, just to sum some of this stuff up before we go to the chart here, theories of emotion. So we have the sight of an oncoming car, perception of the stimulus, all right? Emotion can include the appraisal of the stimulus, such as, is this a threat or not? Now, obviously, if it's riding the yellow lines there, it would probably be seen as a threat. If it was on the other side of the road, okay, and not doing anything weird, not a threat, you do your own business. If it's on the double yellow lines, then you'll probably experience some anxiety and fear. All right, that's the way that would look. Then we have the James Lange theory, the pounding heart. Then we feel the fear of emotion. Cannon-Bard, the pounding heart and the fear go together simultaneously. Two-factor theory, we have the pounding heart, okay, and then we see I am afraid because of the scenario going here, I am afraid, then you have the fear. And then the other one, if you really think about it, What if you avoid the highway today without identifying or explaining any fear is an example of a low road emotion. You didn't appraise it to say, I'm going to go to this road or not today. You just use the low road, no appraisal whatsoever, and you just avoid the road altogether. So what we've done here is we looked at several theories of emotion. We looked at James Lang, our awareness of our specific bodily response to emotion and arousing stimuli. We looked at Cannon Barr, bodily response plus the simultaneous subjective experience. Schachter and Singer, where we have the two factors. We have some sort of generalized arousal, and then that labeling, a conscious label, cognitive label of what we're experiencing. Zayonce and Ladeau, the instant before cognitive appraisal. So appraisal is not in and it automatically happens. We automatically react to a sound in the forest before appraising it. Okay. And then we have Lazarus, where the appraisal, is this something dangerous or not? Sometimes without or awareness, but it defines what our emotion that we're going to experience, how we label it as a danger or not a danger, a threat or not a threat. So those were the theories of emotion. Now we're going to look at emotion slightly differently as we start to wrap things up here. We'll be looking at emotion expression, embodied cognition, how you determine lie detection, emotion and expressive behaviors. Okay, first, let's look here. Carol Izard suggested that there are 10 basic emotions, those evident at birth. Seen here, we have a few. There are 3 that we didn't show. There's a rule about showing 2 in acute faces in one presentation. So we have joy, anger, interest, disgust, surprise, sadness, and then fear. It always concerns me when I see the little tyke there with the fear express. I don't know what they do to get that fear response there, but there you go. Now, what does this suggest? We see, and again, the term should be more global as opposed to universal. Sort of too much there, but is experienced emotion as universal as expressed emotion. And what we're seeing here is that these faces tend to exist in a variety of different cultures around the globe, around the world. So we seem to be pre-packaged, as it were, with certain facial expressions, certain ways to express emotion. And it should be important to note why we talk about emotion so much. Emotion is a way for us to communicate to other people, if you really think about it. Emotion communicates to you. Emotion that's being displayed by your kid or your infant, for example, is displaying how they're feeling, what their physiological body may be going through. Okay, because we can usually associate certain types of body reactions to certain types of emotions. To your significant other, their emotion tells you what they're feeling to some extent, or at least gives you some clue. So these things are important to us to be able to understand what the emotions are conveying to us. Reading emotions are very important. If you're leaving a classroom and all of a sudden you see a bunch of people running one way down the hallway past you, okay, running away from where you were headed, and you look at their faces seem like they are in shock or they're afraid, you'll probably go run with them, okay, because that communicates to you that obviously there's something to be shocked and afraid of, so we want to go with them. All right, so the idea is emotion and your ability to read emotions are very, very important. So, embodied emotion, the role of the autonomic nervous system. Now, the physiological arousal felt during various emotions is orchestrated by the sympathetic nervous system, which triggers activity and changes in various organs. We talked about this way back in chapter 2, the biology of behavior. Later, the parasympathetic division calms down the body. So remember this. We have eyes, salivation, skin, all this type of stuff here. When there is a situation when when there's a danger, for example, a red alert goes out, then it's going to be the sympathetic division that takes over. The pupils will dilate. There will be a decrease in salivation. The skin will sweat. There'll be an increase in respiration. Heart accelerates. Digestion's inhibited. Adrenal glands secrete stress hormones. The immune system functioning is reduced. All these things are done, flipped on or off in various ways in order to prepare the body for the flight or fight response. All right. So we have this surge of emotionality that usually goes on with these types of things, and then the body responds equivalently. And then when the action goes away, when the issue's over, then the parasympathetic division calms everything down. Pupils contract, salivation increases, skin dries, respiration decreases, heart slows, so on and so forth. So the idea is that the autonomic system shows how the body goes through physiological changes as this emotion surge happens. So as this fear, okay, of the kid falling in the water, then the body changes in turn. As the situation calms down, the body again flips and changes in turn with the new condition, the new situation. Now, in body cognition, how do emotions differ in body signs? It is difficult to see differences in emotions from tracking heart rate, breathing, and perspiration. There is a large overlap in the patterns of brain activity across emotions. There are some small differences. For example, fear triggers more amygdala activity than anger. And we also see the following. A general brain pattern, hemispheric differences do seem to appear as well. So we have the positive approach emotions like joy, love, goal seeking correlate with left frontal lobe activity. And then we have the negative withdrawal emotions like disgust, fear, anger, depression, which correlate with right hemisphere activity. We're just talking about correlations here. So the idea is that we see that our body behaviors are very similar across many emotions. Therefore, whatever body emotion, a body that is going through physiologically, it's hard to pinpoint just on that alone what emotion they would have to be experiencing. You have to take into a lot of factors such as context of the situation, for example. So expressed and experienced emotion. See if you can tell what emotions others are feeling, showing and expressing about these topics, detecting emotions in others, gender, emotion, and normal nonverbal behavior, cultural and expressed emotions. So again, this goes with the idea I sort of alluded to earlier about emotions tell us a lot, and being able to detect emotions can provide a great deal of information for us. So emotional expression. Now, these facial expressions they have here, they're demonstrating a dance, a tribal dance that's part of their tradition. Okay. Are there universal forms of emotional expression seen on human faces across all cultures? Are there differences by individual, culture, or gender and how emotions express? So yes and yes. What is the relationship between emotional expression and the inner experience of emotion? We're always trying to find that out. What emotion do we see in these faces and body positions? If these emotions are hard to read, is it because it's a different culture from our own, or because it's a performance? Probably a little bit of both. Okay, so the idea is that we are looking at people and we're trying to understand them by their expression, particularly of their emotion, because it can be very valuable information. So detecting emotion in others. People read a great deal of emotional content in the eyes, again, sort of known as the windows to the soul. The eyes and the faces are very important in detecting emotions in others. In fact, that's where we look a lot. We look at their face, at their eyes. Introverts are better at detecting emotions. Extroverts have emotions that are easier to read. We are primed to quickly detect negative emotions and even negative emotion words. Those who have been abused or biased towards seeing fearful faces as angry, as in the test below. So let's give you a little bit of background here real quickly here. So when we're detecting emotions, we look through the face. And there's a variety of things too that we look for as well that some of you may have heard of before too. Oftentimes what people say, they can say anything and they can lie with their verbal. But what we've found is that most people are not as capable of controlling their nonverbal behavior. All right. So their nonverbal behavior. And so when we see contradictions, conflict between what they are saying and what they are displaying by way of facial expression, by way of body language, uh, the hands acting nervous, all this type of stuff, then we may tend to discount what they're saying. So given our options here, if someone is saying one thing but their behavior is indicating another, do you tend to think that they are lying or not? That is a question to you now. If they say one thing but their behavior seems a little bit iffy, darty eyes or not looking you in the face or seeming fidgety, do you think they may be lying? Yes or no? Lie or no lie? Or you don't know? You can respond in chat, please. So what it comes down to, for the most part, is that we rely on conflicting information sometimes for us to be able to determine the truth. But we do rely a great deal. We start off with the face. So what I'm going to do here, these faces morph from fear to anger. Raise your hand, and I think you guys have hands somewhere on your keyboard. Raise your hand when you first see anger under the red box. So when you see the face and it looks angry to you, raise your hand. Now, the faces will start off fear, then to anger. So the first few faces you'll see will be fearful faces. And then as soon as you see a face that you determine is angry, raise your hand. Once it gets under the red box. Okay. Okay. All right, so most people tended to agree. It was sort of like just about 3 to 4 before the last one. So the idea here is this: what we're really looking at oftentimes are some very subtle changes. Okay, one, more furrowed eyebrows, more little mouth action, all this type of stuff changes subtly, and what it really leads to ultimately is a change in your detection as to whether or not this person is afraid or angry. And think about it, those are two different stories they're telling you. If somebody comes up to you all in a tizzy, so to speak, and they are afraid, that's one thing. Someone comes to you all in a tizzy, so to speak, and they're angry, that's a whole another bag of apples. Okay, so the idea is that, again, emotions and our ability to detect emotions are critical, and they are very important for us to do that. Now, detecting lies and fakes. Let's look at the image. I think I changed this image out from what you guys had in your slides initially. Brain signs of lying. This image shows the average brain regions of 22 subjects during testing. Blue areas represent brain regions more active when telling the truth, red areas when lying. So again, this is not the same as the polygraph test, but again, government agencies, law enforcement, of course, they're looking for more and more ways that are more reliable to be able to ascertain when someone is telling them a big whopping lie and when someone is telling them a truth. All right, so when we look at such things as the polygraphs detecting physiological arousal fail sometimes to correctly identifying when people are lying because it is based on physiological arousal. It's going to be based on your perspiration, your heart rate, your eye movement, all this type of stuff. And the thing about it is this, as we've learned so far in this particular lecture today, is that many physiological behaviors can be related to many variety of different types of emotions. And the premise of polygraphs, where they hook you up to the machines and on your chest and your fingers and all this type of stuff, is belief that someone is going to be stressed out by telling lies. First and foremost, if you're not stressed out by these types of things, then you will never be caught lying. If you do not have any guilt whatsoever when it comes to physiological arousal, it doesn't bother you. So again, for most people, that's not true. But the idea is that they are so many things that can maybe cause a false positive. That's why these things are not utilized in courts. So visible signs of lying, we have eye blinks, decrease, the other facial movements and change. We see there are certain techniques that can be employed to try to look at the face and look for changes in the face. And people go to some very extensive training in this, particularly in law enforcement, to be able to detect people who are lying to them. In fact, there was a show a few years ago called Lie to Me. Some of you might remember it, but many of you are probably too young for that. Lie to Me, where it was based on some work of a real life doctor whose whole business was about trying to tell when people were lying. Okay, so the idea is we see this is not only a potential business, but it's very important for people to be able to verify that someone is telling the truth. And which image is Paul Ekman lying with a fake smile? A real smile uses involuntary muscles around the eyes. I try to get a new picture for you guys, but I'll just have to walk you through it. Basically, what it comes down to, you can see sort of wrinkly type of stuff around the eyes. And these are involuntary muscles, which means that we cannot control them consciously. And when you see wrinkling around the eyes about here, is where it would normally be, that is usually a sign of a genuine smile, meaning that somebody is really happy to see you. Whereas if you don't see that wrinkling around the eyes, if it's rather smooth, that's usually indicating that the person is faking a smile. They're just doing you the lip service. They're throwing you a smile, but their whole body is not really into that smile. Therefore, it is a fake smile. And of course, I'll be honest with you, what time is it? It's about 2 o'clock today. Probably a majority of you has at least thrown out a few fake smiles today already, or will be doing so this evening. Okay, so we see this type of stuff all the time when it comes to, we have a social smile that we throw somebody even though you may not be really feeling it. All right, so detecting lies in face, and there are a variety of things that people are always doing, trying to detect the ability to detect lies and when people are faking things, because people, unfortunately, they do lie and they do fake from time to time. Now, gender and emotional expression and detection. Women seem to have greater and more complex emotional expression. And we've seen this, I believe, before in chapter 5, where they're not necessarily more emotional than men, but they're more willing and capable of a more emotional expression than men are. Women are also more skilled at detecting emotions in others. However, this is an overgeneralization. People tend to attribute women's emotionality to their dispositions and attribute men's emotions to their circumstances. And this is quite true too. So what this basically means, if you see Tom over in the break room sitting in the corner by himself, and he's sort of like trying to hold back tears, you'll say something bad must have happened today. You'll say there's a situation that is causing that emotional behavior. Whereas if you see Sally over there doing the same thing to the same degree that Tom was doing, and whatever name I use, they'll say, "Oh, she's a very sensitive woman." So the idea is that you'll overgeneralize that. That's more like her behavior because you emotionalize her more than men are emotionalized for their behavior. So again, we do see that as a potential issue as well. We also see some emotions as being more male, changing our perception of gender-neutral faces based on emotion. This is an example here. So we're going to see a face, male or female. This face was designed to be gender-neutral. Okay, despite the hair being bald there, gender neutral face. But all we have to do in order to make it more male is to make it more angry looking, and then majority of people will say that's a male face, right? Because we tend to associate anger more with male faces. Now, looking at culture and emotional expression, are there universally recognized emotions? Well, from the little infant pictures, we probably say there probably are. There seem to be some universally understood facial expressions that we can see in adults. People of various cultures agree on the emotional labels for the expressions on the faces to the right. People in other studies that have more accuracy judging emotions from their own culture. So if you see people from your own culture, you'll be a better judge of their emotions than people who are cross cultural. I'll show you these faces again in a second. And I'll give you a chance to see what you think they are. Okay, let's look at these faces more carefully here. All right, so what is A? Anyone? Is she happy, surprised, fearful, sad, angry, or disgust? All right, good. Happy.
Happy.
All right. What about B?
Shocked.
Shocked. Anyone else? Similar to shocked? Emotion similar to shocked without a negative connotation. That's shocked me. Oh, thank you. Surprise. All right, good. All right. What about C?
Worried.
Worried. Something like worried, but not. What was that?
Anxious.
Anxious. Close to it. Fear. All right. What about D?
Sad.
Okay. E.
Angry.
And finally, F.
Disgusted.
Disgusted. All right, good. All right, so the idea here is that we see that most people are able to get, even when you weren't getting it exactly right, you were still in the ballpark because anxious, fear, somewhat related there. But the idea is that we see that our ability to detect facial expressions, which are usually be tied to their emotionality, is going to be very important for us. So if you're at some sort of meeting, let's say you're in a different country at some sort of meeting, you want to be able to read the people's facial expressions to see if they're buying what you are selling, because your whole business, your whole contract may be based on this, and therefore you want to make sure that you're getting as much information as you possibly can. That's what it comes down to. Now, a couple of other things, emotion detection and context cues. What emotions do you see below? How can you tell what emotions she is feeling? Because the faces are exactly the same, our detection of emotion must be based on context. So I changed this a little bit so we can get down to it. So the face here is exactly the same face, but the context of the face. All right, so one will say that this person most likely is disgusted. He is somewhat fearful or upset about something. And then the other guy with the bald fist, he's seen as angry. Again, same face, but different context. And so the context really does matter, okay, as to given one facial expression at a party or the same facial expression at a meeting means totally different things, because context, even in that situation too, may be drastically changing your interpretation of what's been going, what it means. All right, and finally, linking emotions and expressive behaviors. So if anyone's ever told you to smile, you'll feel better, and that usually makes people upset, by the way, when you tell them to do that, there is research to suggest that that might be true. So the facial feedback effect, facial position and muscle changes can alter which emotion we feel. Again, facial position and muscle changes can alter which emotion we feel. In one study, people whose faces were moved into smiling or frowning positions experience a change in mood. Smiling happy, frowning sad. Fake a relaxed smile and you might feel better. It's not just about faces. In one experiment, extending a middle finger, or two, a thumb while reading led to seeing characters with one, hostility, or two, a positive attitude. So the guy at the top, though forced into smiling position, ended up feeling happier than the guy down here at the bottom, whose face was not allowed to be happy, but more of a frown. So the notion here is that we see that uh, we can alter people's emotions by changing the physiology or the actions of their behaviors. And then we sort of lead to it. If you think about it, we covered a chapter just before this, chapter on learning, that conditioning may play a role in it. Think about it this way. What do you feel like 90% of the time when you're smiling? Happy, right? So in a way, or amused, some sort of positive emotion. So if your mouth is forced into that direction, it's almost like it's been trained, then you want to have that conditioned response, in a sense, of feeling happier. This oozes out on you and you can't help it. So that may be a little bit of what's going on as well. All right. We have a little bit more time than we usually do before we end these sessions today. Are there any questions? I believe there is a paper assignment that you guys are going to be attending in next week, I believe. I'm going to try to have a bonus session for this class, just to see if there are any questions about material that we've gone over, will go over, or the paper at that time as well. I'll probably slate it for Monday night sometime or Monday evening. So that's, you can look forward to that as well. But at this time, are there any questions about the material we covered today, covered previously, will cover, or the paper? Anybody? Okay, the sounds of silence can be wonderful. No questions, no questions. Okay, if there are no questions, then I'm going to let you guys go. This session should be posted in about a few hours here from now. If there's nothing else, you guys are free to skedaddle. Have a nice weekend, a nice Easter break. Talk to you later. Bye.